Man, y'all ever have just one of those days? Got this new board in for this poor abused Blues Junior. Really proud of myself, doing a real neat wiring job, everything's great. I go to put it in and I realize I got the damn board upside down. So I've got to undo it and flip everything over so the screw holes line up. Mother puss bucket. Alright. That's an hour and a half of my life I'll never get back. I love unbillable time, but it was my mistake. Anyway, this will be better anyway. The wires that I was using for the heaters on there before, I just bought that wire from a vendor and it said high temperature PVC. Well, it won't melt on a sunny day, but other than that, the high temperature part is wildly optimistic. It was melting terribly, and while the first initial install was good, it wouldn't hold up to any rework. So that stuff is out of here, and I rebuilt it, and this is Teflon coated true high temperature wire. It's 20 gauge, which is in fact overkill for this with just two 84s and some 12X7s. I could have used 22 gauge for the after the EL84s. I probably could have used 22 gauge for the whole thing. You know, I've got this in 18 gauge if I'm dealing with EL34s or 6L6s or something, or you know, big current draw. But yeah, this will be nice. It's up there against the wall. It's gonna be well away from everything else. And got some new tube retainers here that came with this whole setup, and these tubes are rock solid for the first time in its life. The kit came with some sockets for the preamp that had tube shields, but I didn't think it was necessary here. It makes it harder to change. Can add the microphonics in a combo amp. I'm not a huge fan of tube shields when they're not necessary to hold a tube in place, but these new Belton sockets, I use Beltons for the preamp, not the ceramics that usually come with this kit. And these tubes they're not wiggly at all. They're solid. These have got ceramic, but they're really good quality. This is not the cheap stuff, and I'm really pleased with how that came out. Next, I'm looking at what I'm going to reuse versus redo. For instance, the blue and brown primary connections from the output transformer normally go to these quick connects on the board, and then they run through these ribbon cables. You can see what I think of ribbon cables, and then to pin 7 on each output tube. Well, the only reason they did that, besides ease of assembly, is so they could access this little diode to ground on the plate, which should not be necessary now that we don't have a PCB mounted tube socket. So I'm gonna cut these stupid quick connects off and solder these wires directly to pin 7 of each output tube, and that'll be good not only for longevity and more reliable connections and better current flow through this wire rather than through this little stuff, but running this blue wire here past these grid wires on these ribbon cables is a common source of oscillation in these amps. So that'll get rid of that. And these ribbon cables are coming out, and individual wires will be run from the board to where they go on the tube sockets. It'll be very nice. Some components will be moved to the tube sockets, like these 100 ohm screen grid resistors, gone. Some 1Ks mounted at pin 9 of each output tube. These will no longer be here to potentially burn the board. These 1.5K grid stoppers are going to stay on the board, but another 1.5K will be added at pin 2 of each output tube, giving a total grid stopper there of 3K, and moving the grid stopper where it does the most good. The bias will get cooled off, as I've mentioned in other Blues Juniors. I'm replacing the IC brand filter caps. I replace that plastic input jack with a switchcraft, of course. A few other little circuit tweaks around here, not all of which I want to mention. I'm going to replace these 1N4006s in the bridge rectifier because I don't know why Fender saved a penny per diode, but 1N4006s die in these fairly commonly. 1N4007s do not, and it's a no-brainer to change those out. These quick connects on these heater wires, I've mentioned this in the Deluxe Reverb reissue videos. They normally go to the board here. I will not be doing that. These will be going directly to pins, well, to these heater connections. Let me get this to focus right. that are built onto this new board. Move the stuff out of the way. There's one there and one there. And I've made a new artificial center tap here on this board, so if there's any failure, the heat stays on the new board that can handle it rather than on the PCB. Which leaves the only heater-related things on the entire board: this fuse, which will no longer be really doing anything, and a diode and a resistor, which just drives the LED lamp supply from the heaters. That's fine. So these relatively thick wires are going to get replaced with some small ones, and they will be tied here as well. So there will be 2 small wires going from the heater supply to the board just for that LED connection. All the actual current of actually heating up the tubes will be off the PCB. And this is a point I've mentioned in a lot of conversations to people. I don't know if I put this in a video. In terms of the quality of this PCB and what it's doing, 90% of this PCB is no better or worse than what you'd find in a 70s or early 80s Marshall, who also used really crappy PCBs. They were single-sided, single-layered, not through-hole, not very rugged. The difference between the Marshall board and these boards is the Marshall does not have the filter caps on the board. The Marshall does not have the screen grid resistors on the board. The Marshall does not have any heater components on the board. The one thing that the Marshall does have that deals with current and heat on their board, well, they have the rectifier diodes, and they have some dropping resistors. And where do I see damage on Marshall boards? Sometimes on the diodes, fairly commonly in the dropping resistors in the power supply. See that Park 150, which is still a Marshall. It has that big char on the board from too large a dropping resistor. So Marshall only made that mistake a small amount, and those amps hold up. They have more things that get hot here, and they have their primary connections, and they've got their heater connections. So Fender is using the same crappy board as Marshall did 30, 40 years ago, but they're just putting more heat and current on the board. If they had done this in a different way, moving this stuff onto a smaller, discrete, thicker board, spend the money for a power supply board, this amp could have come to market for maybe $10 more and would never darken the bench of guys like me. Well, I say that. They probably would have had the same stupid hot bias and they would have caught on fire regardless, but whoever designed the stuff with Leo back in the day is also long, long gone. Well, it's all done, including the isolated switchcraft metal frame jack with shielded wire going to the socket, and everything's all hand wired on the output board, and new caps and new diodes and some changes to make it sound better, make it more reliable. Bias is all cool. I cleaned all the pots, and it's all working better than it probably ever has, and it will continue to work really well for years and years and years. All that said, having just made one of the world's best blues juniors, I don't think I'll be doing this again. Quite aside from that mistake I made, which cost me about an hour and a half, I just have way too much time in this, and if I charge my full hourly rate, this would just, greatly exceed the value of the amp. But I told the guy I would do it, and I did it, and I'm gonna lose some money on this. It's part of the learning curve of working on amps. So this will be the last one of these I do, unless someone is just made of money, in which case I'd rather build them something from scratch. So I think the owner is going to be very happy, but I just don't think this is a realistic, cost-effective thing to do in the future. It's a shame that it was necessary in this case because of the Fender Authorized Service Center that botched what should have been a very simple repair so thoroughly. And it's a shame that most of these need the same work every time because Fender saved the wrong pennies on filter caps and really messed up the bias on this, and the lead-free solder is just asking for trouble with these things. But all that's gone on this one, and this one should not have any of the problems that blues juniors like to have. But man, this would be an expensive thing if I charged what my time was actually worth.